Hello, people of the internet. Steve Persh here today. Today, I want to talk about what kinds of website operations practices change when you go professional in the world of WordPress. I personally had probably a too long transition from amateur to professional-ish to professional web developer. In retrospect, there's a lot I could have, should have, would have done differently if I had known better. And what I like about Pantheon as a platform, though, part of what's kept me working here for 7.5 years now, is that Pantheon just solves so many of the pain points that I hit as a developer trying to level up my professionalism. So to join me in this conversation, I want to bring in two of my Pantheon colleagues, Aaron Onken and Ryan Hoover. Let's get you added onto the stream. Hello, Aaron. Hello, Ryan. How's it going, guys?
It's going great.
I'm good. Going real good.
All right. Now, Aaron, and Ryan as well. I think this is your first time on the Pantheon live stream. Aaron, could you tell us a bit more about your role at Pantheon, your background in web development?
Yeah, so I'm a solutions engineer with Pantheon, and I've been in the WordPress space for about 10 years. Before coming to WordPress, I was actually a Ruby on Rails developer. And so I've had a bit of a trajectory where I learned one way of doing development and then learned the WordPress way of doing development. And I've worn a number of hats in the WordPress space too. I was in the hosting context, especially. I've worked for several WordPress hosts, and so done a number of things in that capacity. Migrated a lot of sites. I managed an onboarding company for one of those hosts for a while. So I've got like experience with various parts of using WordPress.
That sounds great. So for those watching live, if you've got questions about anything Aaron just mentioned there, I wasn't expecting to have a Ruby on Rails discussion, but I do sometimes wonder about that as like a multiverse version of Steve. If the Steve that heard about Ruby on Rails in 2008 or 2009, whatever it was, like that was a path I could have gone down. So if you have questions about Ruby on Rails, but more likely if you've got questions about migrating WordPress sites to Pantheon or anything else Aaron mentioned, feel free to drop them in the chat. Ryan, how about you? How did you get started as a web developer, and what do you do at Pantheon?
Yeah, I've been in WordPress for about 15 years, I think. I actually was a teacher before I got into web development, and was using WordPress in teaching. Discovered I really liked working on it, building it, started developing plugins, and I've actually going web developer after that. Worked for an agency, a couple web hosts, led a web team of at 1.8 people, building out. We had several sites that we were running. Right now, I'm at Pantheon in the professional services department. I lead up our team of architects that can help out customers who are coming over either during their onboarding migration phase or even longer term if they're having problems with their WordPress sites.
Well, that sounds great. And again, for those watching live, if you've got questions about anything Ryan mentioned, please drop them into the chat. So for our main topic today, again, I want to talk about professional WordPress best practices and some of the pressures on teams that lead to those best practices. I'm going to add in another camera to our stream here. Let's get it highlighted here. So there are a number of best practices that we could talk about. We definitely won't have time in today's stream to hit all of these, but many of these best practices, all these best practices are things that are baked in some way straight into the Pantheon platform. Things like Git-based version control connected to our deployment pipelines, the way we lock down the live environment, environments per Git branch, regional infrastructure. If anyone wants to see it, just earlier today, I spun up a WordPress site in Australia. Pantheon made that very easy to do. Performance monitoring, package management, on and on and on. Ryan, Aaron, we've got a long list here. I'm curious if either of you could time travel and give any of these best practices to your early self as like, hey, you haven't heard of this thing, or maybe you've heard of this thing, but you're not using it yet. You really should start using this thing. For me, real version control is probably at the top of the list. I did the Dreamweaver check in, check out, and for like a couple of years, that was version control for me. And I wish I had known better earlier. Aaron, how about you?
Same, exactly the same. Like, in fact, I'm glad version control is at the top of the list because, like I mentioned, I was taught Ruby on Rails before WordPress, and part of the fundamentals I was trained on is using Git for version control. And then when I started to get some projects from some freelance customers that I had that were WordPress based, I learned WordPress development, and none of the sort of resources that I had ever talked about version control. And so I thought, like, WordPress development just doesn't use that. And I got into a couple of awkward situations with a freelance customer because I made changes and they actually liked it before the changes, and I had no way to revert. So I had to like manually revert. And that's when I implemented version control, but I did not start out using it. So I'm definitely glad that's at the top of the list.
Chris Reynolds is popping into the chat to say, yeah, but Subversion though. Yeah, I guess if I really do play out that imaginary scenario where I teleport myself back to 2006, 2007 and say, use version control, like I'm pretty sure Git started around then, but I didn't personally really start using Git until 2011. I was using Subversion for a couple of years there after Dreamweaver check in, check out. And I hope to never have to go back to Subversion because it was painfully slow compared to Git. Ryan, how about you? Which of these would you give as a gift to your younger self?
Since you both already took version control, I'm going to go with the deployment pipelines. Having been somebody that started off with like, hey, here's our grunt gulp tasks, and having to run that again and again, remember to run it every single time I made a little CSS edit on those themes I was building, how often I had to do that, how painstaking that was, how many times I forgot to do it, and then spent the next 2 hours trying to debug why isn't my change showing up. I think that idea of deployment pipelines would have been a huge time saver for me.
Yes, absolutely. So much of my professionalization, I think, runs through pain related to grunt gulp SAS compilation. Like the fact that I was on a team where like, okay, we are doing SAS compilation, but everyone's doing it with like a different set of command line flags, and then is making the bug so much worse and so much harder to track down when we're doing our jobs in just slightly different ways. That is that's no fun. All right, so we also have here a growing list of pressures. We'll save our Legos for just a minute. But we've got a list of pressures that can grow for a team, for an individual in their journey becoming a WordPress professional. Your budget might be growing. Your budget might be constraining. The size of your team might be going up. The cost of mistakes might be going up. Customer expectations, site complexity, security concerns, team specialization, fluctuating traffic, all might be going up. Ryan, was it you beforehand said like, oh yeah, what about timelines? Yes, I can't believe I left timelines out of this list. That was absolutely probably the most pressing pressure I felt as an early developer. Am I going to get this done on time? Any others we should be adding to this list?
Like you, I'm amused that timelines wasn't on there because deadlines become really helpful to like instilling the level of panic that's necessary in getting things done.
Yes.
Yes. Nothing I can think of to add to pressures, because like the big ones are there, like time, budget, and like site complexity kind of relates to like quality, too. Like those are the big ones.
Yeah. So before we get too far down the road here, one thing I do want to call out is that like there's a trap that I've seen in online discourse around best practices where they're sort of like handed down on stone tablets saying like this is the right way to do it, and if you're not doing it, you're wrong, you're bad, and like let's leave out the like abstract notions of good and evil here. Like if you're watching this and you're succeeding as a professional web developer without version control or without command line tools, like
good for you.
I can argue with that. Like
yeah,
I operated as a professional without using command line tools just fine. I personally now prefer Git on the command line, but like if you prefer Git through a GUI. That's not wrong. Don't allow yourself to be shamed for that or for the absence of any of these things. But I do want us to talk about, like, as these things go up, you're probably going to find yourself steering towards one of these best practices. Aaron or Ryan, I'm curious if either of you, like, in looking at your past experience, can think, in retrospect, I'm surprised at how successful I was in a given project or in a given role without one of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm still looking near the top of the list, and locking down the live environment like jumps out at me because I've probably had experience that maybe the two of you have not had. One of the hats I used to wear in a hosting context was I had the dubious honor of cleaning up malware, and that's not easy. And there's no such thing, I've learned, as a small malware infection. So there were a lot of circumstances where people would get by for years without getting any sort of like infection. But because of like one particular plugin that was like out of date, they then like fell victim to a very large malware infection. And even if you haven't experienced it, the one time it happens, if you have to shop around for solutions that will clean up malware for you, I think you will find they're very expensive. And I happen to be working in an environment where, like, we function as the host, and since if your site ever got infected, we would clean it up for free, and I got to do the cleanup, and it was a huge benefit to people because they didn't have to worry about the expense, which is hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And I'm kind of surprised how many people get, like, sometimes a decade down the road of managing a WordPress site and are lucky enough to have an environment that doesn't lock down the live environment, and they don't get infected. But when they do, then it's a bad thing. So I think it's an underrated best practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it has been a point of friction for Pantheon sometimes in the WordPress community for us to say, like, we lock down the live environment more than some of the alternatives out there. But, like, the cost of not doing that,
right?
the cost of like, first of all, like, do you even want that to be a possibility? Like,
right.
Even if money is no object, do you even want that to be a possibility that you could have malware installed on your live website? And then also, yeah, like, even if that is acceptable, it's just a total pain to clean up afterwards. Why would you ever want that?
It's like, you can deal with the aftermath, and even if you do have a host that cleans it up for free, isn't it better if the infection never happened to begin with?
I think so. Ryan, how about you?
Yeah.
Have you whistled past the graveyard on any of these?
Oh, I think definitely performance monitoring, including with that, like, just how is your site doing over time? Are you actually watching it? If you've ever tried to maintain multiple sites, the number of times when I was in the agency world, and I will definitely not name names, where a customer's site went down, we noticed 2 weeks later, and we happened to get it up before the customer did, and we sneaked by without recognizing that. Or when a page suddenly crashes, and what was taking 2 seconds is now taking 2 minutes to load. That idea, that continuous alerting, monitoring, and then paired with that alerting of when something goes wrong. And once you get that in place, I know I wondered how we ever did without that.
Yeah, that reminds me of a pain point we often talk about at Pantheon, of, like, the never-ending relaunch, where, like, a lot of agencies, a lot of web teams structure their work with the mindset of, like, we have the live site. For some reason, it's old, bad, unacceptable, and we're just going to rebuild the new site. And it's going to take a long time, but we're going to rebuild the new thing. And when I was working in that mode, rebuilding the new thing, you start with a clean install of WordPress or Drupal, and it's really fast. And then over the months of building the new one, like, it gets slow. And if you're not tracking where the tipping points are, like, what plugin you added or what configuration you changed that made it a whole lot slower, then you're just launching another site that's slow. and
Yeah.
you might not end up in a better spot. All right, so let's move on to the main event. For the rest of the live stream here, we're going to run it as kind of a game here. Before we went live, we each picked out our own special Lego figurines from my son's Lego collection. So I'll be this guy here, and the way this game is going to work, we're going to draw arrows between pressures we've experienced that have led us to certain best practices. So so this is me. Aaron really wanted the motorcycle guy with the mustache, and Ryan wanted the guy in the green overalls. All right, so we will draw a line between a pressure and a best practice. And then we'll talk about how Pantheon enables that. So, a story that I've told on the live stream, I think before, is the pain that I hit when the cost of my mistakes really jumped, and that made me realize, like, I absolutely need a more formal deployment pipeline. And I bring up this pressure because it in part because this, I think, illustrates how these pressures can work against one another. So I was in a situation where the site is live after the never-ending relaunch. The site goes live, but then there is a high pressure to, on a quick timeline, add more stuff, add more features, faster. But the site is live, so the cost of mistakes has gone up significantly. But I stayed in the practice of the way I get changes out the door is by FTPing straight from my laptop to the live site. And I didn't pause enough to think about the cost of mistakes here has gone up a lot. And if I just FTP straight up to live and I check the one page that I think I've changed without checking the other pages that I didn't realize I also changed, well, then the literal phone calls start coming in from the customer who is very angry to realize that that their site is broken. So I don't know. I'm going to bring up the screen share now, but Aaron, Ryan, does that little story there set off any emotions or memories? Right,
my PTSD reacted to that a little bit. Yes.
All right. So on Pantheon, that's less likely to happen. We can't eliminate the possibility of deploying broken code to the live environment completely, but we can make it a whole lot easier to avoid that problem by giving you a dev environment, a test environment, a live environment for every single site. Like, it's not an extra step to set up dev, test, and live. The way it was for me in my early days, where, like, I have to figure out a doc route, and I need to manually make an extra database, and I need to argue with my coworkers about, do we call this middle environment test, testing, staging? That's just all figured out in advance. So in the Pantheon dashboard here, we've got the dev environment. I'll open it up here. We've got a vanilla WordPress site that I've brought up before. One detail that we're seeing right now, one of the ways Pantheon is able to make this work is that these dev environments, when they're not active, they spin down, so to speak, which is what we just saw, a delay in load time. But now that some traffic has come, this site is now much snappier. But we did see, I don't want to just gloss over the fact that we waited a couple seconds for this dev environment to become available. So the dev environment here on this site has some commits that I've made on previous live streams. This is the site that I have purposefully made slow. Removing the slow part.
That's a great commit message right there. Like, it really clarifies what's going on.
Well, I wanted to slow down a website, so I put in a sleep statement. Put it to sleep for 3 seconds, and then I removed the slow part. So my commit message was removing the slow part.
Actually, very clear.
Yeah. So if I want to move that code change from the dev environment to the test environment, that's just baked into the Pantheon dashboard, removing the slow part. I did not think about the the unintentional comedy of my commit message here. But you know, the Pantheon dashboard here is just baking in best practices, like do your code changes somewhere other than the live environment first.
Yes.
Test
Yeah.
test them somewhere other than your dev environment or your live environment.
A lot of
And
folks also find that the status tab is pretty helpful on that front too, because that's just an extra set of eyes to make sure you're adhering to best practices. Some environments, for example, don't have the sort of visibility into problematic plugin versions that status check actually looks for. So you get the additional set of eyes knowing that, you know, somebody else is taking a look at the best practices that you're you know, adhering to make sure that you're pushing the right code. For example, like Query Monitor needs an update.
I'm a little behind on that one.
Yeah. Fortunately, there are no vulnerabilities there, but there are a couple of older versions that do need to be updated. So
so I can update those in the dev environment,
Yes.
commit the changes, and then move them on up. All right, so we'll call that a demo for deployment pipelines. All right, Aaron, you are up next. Let me add back our list of professional pressures and our list of best practices. Where would you, with your motorcycle helmet and mustache, where would you like to draw a line?
I think looking at the best practices here, I think this is kind of related to timeline, I suppose, or like, because timeline and efficiency kind of go hand in hand.
Sure.
And I'm looking at command line tools.
Okay.
I was when I first you know, started doing WordPress development, I didn't use much in the way of command line tools because there's a lot about WordPress that they kind of try to make simple enough that you can do it in the WordPress admin. But since I started out as a Ruby on Rails developer, I was used to doing most of my coding at the command line, and I find the command line tools really speed me up, especially when it comes to more complex things that I could script. So like I've got a few bash scripts that I rely pretty heavily upon, and that helps me adhere to timelines because it just makes me faster.
All right. We for those watching, we genuinely did not pre-plan this game out. I used to do a lot of improv comedy, and I'm enjoying being put on the spot here. I just signed into Terminus, our command line, to like, oh, all right, yeah, let me demo something Terminus related here.
Thank you for yes-anding me.
Yes, exactly. So you know, the way I like to talk about Terminus, Pantheon's command line tool, is that it gives you a command line option for doing everything that you can do in the dashboard. So you know, just earlier today, I used the dashboard to create a site just to show that, or to show the beginning of that flow quickly. Let me go to this workspace overview. I could create a new site, WordPress, Drupal, custom upstream. Basically, those are for large organizations that basically do their own distributions of WordPress or Drupal, often used in the academic space where like a university has a distribution of WordPress or Drupal that's meant for an academic department. We can do that same thing on the command line, Terminus site create. And here's a question for you guys. How do you feel? What's your emotional reaction to command line errors? And I ask because I used to fear them. I used to be like, I just made a mistake here. There's red. I don't feel that way anymore. I haven't really memorized like all of the parameters in the right order. So I knew I would get an error if I just run Terminus site create. It's going to tell me like, hey, you need a site name, a label, and an upstream ID. That's fine. Yeah, that to me is faster than running Terminus site create -h to get the help text for the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like it actually it's a very effective output right there, because you know some command line tools they'll tell you there's an error, but they don't really tell you how to fix it. This is an error message that tells you what the solution is.
Yeah.
So it's great.
I mean, as we're discussing it though, I do feel like feature request for Pantheon's CLI team as well here. There are ways where like this could just drop me into an interactive selection for all of these, but
Sure.
I can live without that. But yeah, I find these command line tools are so powerful for speed, sometimes for speeding up day-to-day work. Like you're probably not creating a site over and over again, but one thing you might be doing over again is like clearing caches. Somewhere in here. Where is it? Site. That is a site level command, I think. Maybe. It's been a while.
I think it's its own cache clear. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Site upstream cache clear, self cache clear. So if you're clearing caches, oh, that's an environment command.
Okay.
That's an environment command because you're clearing caches on an individual environment. So if for some reason you're doing development and I'm working on my my WordPress Australia site and I want to be clearing my caches over and over again, I can do terminus env cache clear. Again, it'll wait, not dot colon
There you
go. Cache clear. And here is where I need the dot, the dev environment. Dot cache clear, clear cache.
That looks good. There it goes.
There we go.
Yeah.
So while the CLI, if you're I don't use our CLI every day anymore. In previous roles, I have lived a terminus heavy lifestyle. Not so much these days. But what I like about this is now rerunning this is as simple as up arrow enter.
Yeah.
And depending on what you're doing, that might be a whole lot faster than clicking over a couple tabs and doing that.
Yep. One organization that I talked to recently, like they don't create new sites all that often, but when they do, there's a specific flow they go through. And I wrote a quick bash script for them because I walked through the entire process one time. The bash script was really just me copying and pasting those terminus commands so that when the bash script runs, it runs them all in sequence, and it'll pull a new dev environment from an upstream. It'll put that dev environment behind basic auth, so it enables like that security measure. It backs up the dev environment. It then promotes dev to test, puts that behind basic auth, backs up the test environment, and then promotes test to live, puts that behind basic auth. So it gets the entire environment set up for them to do their dev cycle on, which would otherwise be like just a bunch of button clicks in the dashboard, but they can script it and just run one command and do everything.
Yes.
Aaron, one advantage to that is they know it's going to be locked down. It's so easy to miss that if you're doing it manually and forget to put tests behind that basic auth. Yep. And if you're promising that to customers or if whatever your stakeholders are really relying on that, it could be really impactful to have that human error streaking.
Yeah. I often, we're kind of blurring into a discussion of like continuous integration. And one way I think about continuous integration is that it's a codification of your culture. So if it's a part of your culture that like we really don't want members of the public to see our dev sites, like it's a cultural preference for different companies. With Pantheon, like you can manually set that here in the dashboard, but like if you want to ensure that you are never not adding this, then doing those steps through a script are going to it's going to be a much better way of ensuring that you're hitting all of those values. All right, we have seen a glimmer of command line tools. If you're interested in watching this video on more command line things, check out Pantheon docs, check out Pantheon's learning site where you can see more of Terminus. But I want to keep us rolling here. Let's bring the screen share down. Let's put Ryan on the spot. All right, Ryan, I've got you here on stage. Would you like to draw a line from a professional pressure to a best practice?
I'm going to take us in a little bit of a different direction and take us from team size over to package management.
Ooh, all right. So unpackage that for me. Why would growing team size lead you to using a package manager?
So coming back from personal experience where I was on a team that went from 2 to 9, when we were 2 people and somebody went to say update plugins, all they had to do was update the plugins. At that point, we're using version control. And so the new plugin files get committed in. And so if we were both updating plugins, it was easy enough just to lean across the desk and say, hey, Brant, go pull down the latest changes. It's no big deal. We could figure that easily up as 2 people. Once we got bigger, once we got up to 5, 6 people, that became a lot harder to manage. You get a lot of Git conflicts if you're all trying to update the same files, those same kind of contributed plugins that are coming in. So we went to package management, we went to Composer-based work, and so we're installing all of our plugins with Composer. And that opened up a world of possibilities for us. Suddenly, it was just a single file that got updated. It was easy to handle if there were any Git conflicts. It was a lot easier to see what was changing. It was a lot easier to control which version of which plugin was going out. And then I'll throw out there too, once we went there, it was a lot easier to share code between all the different sites we were running. If we have the same plugin that we custom developed that we're running on 4 or 5 different sites, it's so much easier to use package management to push out that latest version to all 5 sites, rather than waiting for us to eventually get around to update site number 5 because, we never really work on it. But eventually we'll go push out the latest change of that plugin over to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me now switch us over to a screen share here. We'll take this camera out. All right. For anyone who might not be familiar with package management, I'm going to bring up, yes, I do trust the authors of Drupal 10, I hope. So, right, tell me how you feel about this explanation. One way I think about package management is a simplification of the question, how do I update this file in my website? So in a non-package manager state, if you're on a WordPress site or a Drupal site, you've got multiple answers to the question, how do I update the thing? And like in the example you just gave, like the literal answer to how do we update the thing is like we're talking across our desks and saying like, hey, did you update that plugin? But plugin updates in WordPress or Drupal core updates, WordPress plugins, Drupal modules, like have one way in which you update. Like you could use the built-in WordPress system. You could use a command line tool like we just saw to update the stuff, but that is a different mode from updating core. And then like the themes you've written, the modules or plugins you've written specific to this site, like the way you update those is you write more code or you change your code. It's like 3 different answers to the question, how do I update the stuff? With package management, so what we're looking at here in the screen share is the composer.json file for an individual Drupal site. This is simplifying the number of possible answers to the question, how do I update the thing? Because we're kind of removing the distinction between core of WordPress or Drupal and the modules and plugins. It's just the stuff that I wrote specifically for this one website and the stuff I didn't that I'm just going to bring in. And so first off, does that resonate with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like the idea of updating. I actually might steal that. I often describe it as whenever you're developing your website with Composer, you're not checking in the code itself anymore. You're checking in the instructions for what code you want. I think,
yes.
Yeah, the updating goes well with that. All you got to do is update your instructions. You don't have to actually go and update the full-on website.
Yeah, that is another big change that can come with package management. It's then going to become much more likely that your like your git ignore file is gonna have more stuff in it, because you're saying, like, not only do we have a clear line between the code I wrote for this website and the code that I didn't. The code that I didn't write, I'm not version controlling that. All I'm version controlling is a reference to the fact that I need composer packages, or a reference to the fact that I need Drupal core. And that's much cleaner. The site that I happen to have brought up here is one where it seems that I never ran composer install, because I'm only seeing a composer JSON file. Again, we didn't pre-plan this, so I didn't know where we were going to go. But I'm liking it in that we're now going to see what happens when I run the composer install command. Side note, Composer 2 is so much faster than Composer 1. Ryan, you were talking before the stream and after about your usage of Composer. Did you start using Composer during Composer 1 when it was painfully slow? Okay. Yeah. I'm glad that you have such an emotionally positive reaction to Composer. I found it so painfully slow.
Oh my God. The amount of problems I have with cache clearing even in Composer 1 compared to Composer 2. Yeah, Composer 2 is a huge upgrade if you haven't made the leap yet, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of the Drupal community felt burned by the jump to Composer in the Composer 1 era. We're like, doing anything, like, I'm just gonna have to wait a minute. I run Composer install, and then I wait a minute or 2 or 3, and that's painful. And I just ran Composer install now, and I didn't time it, but it took a few seconds. So what I have now, after running Composer install, after telling my computer, go figure out a more specific version of what all this means, that we have a Composer JSON file, which is saying, like, oh yeah, just give me basically the main branch of Pantheon's upstream configuration. Go get me Drupal 10, whatever version of Drupal 10 is out there. The composer.lock file is then saying, like, okay, I have found very specific versions to everything that you need, and all, perhaps more importantly, or just as importantly, all the implied dependencies. So this composer lock file is much, 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 much longer, because the implications of just saying, go get me Drupal core, go get me Drush, the command line tool for Drupal, the implications of that means, like, okay, we've got to figure out this whole dependency tree. And again, the nice part about package managers is they figure out all this stuff for you, which is not always the case if you're not using something like a package manager. All right. I'm feeling pretty good about our illustration of package management there. Anything else you guys want to call out? Wait, Lee's got a question here. Folks with sites still on Composer 1. It is so worth the time. Yes. All right. Lee here. Lee here is giving us a big +1. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lee, for the +1. Yes. Switch over to Composer 2. You will feel better. You'll be less grumpy.
Future you will thank you for it.
All right. Let us be done with the Composer screen share, unless Aaron or Ryan, anything else you want to highlight on Composer before we go back to our board?
Last thing I'd call out with Composer is it makes it a lot easier to roll a plugin back if you need to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Often you roll out a plugin, you realize with the performance monitoring, oh crud, this latest version of Yoast just tanked my performance. Yeah. Actually happened. It becomes a lot easier to actually happen to roll back to version 9 or whatever it was. I think it was 10 that had so many problems. And
yeah, a plugin like Yoast should not be tanking your performance. But in an internal discussion about object caching, we're talking about, like, the plugins that correlate with the things that need more object caching, and I was surprised to see Yoast on the list, but that's something maybe for us to dig into more later. All right, because I'm going to have more fun if I'm not the person drawing the arrow, and I'm here to optimize for my own fun. Aaron, you're back on the board. Can you draw us another connection between a professional pressure and a best practice?
I'm apparently going bottom up on professional pressures because I've been looking at fluctuating traffic for a little while.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
I think of containerization the most when I think of fluctuating traffic. I've mentioned before that I've worn a lot of like WordPress hats. I've been, the WordPress end user. I've been the WordPress developer that manages WordPress on behalf of a client, and I've been, the WordPress host as well. And every one of those experiences got better in a containerized environment than it was like on a traditional virtual private server. Because like the traditional VPS is like it's a pretty rigid box with limits for everything, and then if you bump up against any of those limits, no matter what they are, that's when things like your site going down starts to become a thing. And I promise any of you who've been frustrated with a hosting experience where your site went down, like I can promise you that the support agent that you're working with trying to get your site back up is as disappointed with the experience as you are. Like they don't like being in that situation any more than you do. And the fact that on a traditional VPS, oftentimes they have to go and like literally switch it off and then back on again to get the site back up is silly that that's a manual process that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Containerization fixes so many things like on that front. One, scaling is easier because we can deploy additional containers to balance out the traffic, so we can scale horizontally without taking your site offline too. In a traditional VPS environment, oftentimes, like if you want to scale up and go from something that's like a small to a medium or a medium to a large, they have to take your VPS offline for a little bit of time to scale it up. With containers, you don't have to do that.
And you shouldn't have to take your site offline. That's not something I ever want to explain to the person who cares about the website's end results, who's feeling the pain of the site going down or slowing down, to have to explain to that person, like, I'm going to fix it, but first I'm going to make it much worse.
Yes.
Because,
right.
Like I don't want to explain that. That's
exactly.
so fun. So that pain point is something Pantheon figured out, pretty like that's what allowed Pantheon to become a company at all, figuring out that kind of containerization. So I brought up here an illustration of how it works. So with a Pantheon basic plan, you get one PHP application container. It's going to sit behind our global CDN. I should also say that since Pantheon became a company, like halfway through our history, we added the CDN layer, a content delivery network, and you can go back in our live streams and watch much more detailed explanations of what the CDN does. But it can take a whole lot of load off of your application containers, so that should be protecting you in the situation of fluctuating traffic. But behind that, when traffic is fluctuating, when people are signed in, like the thing that got Pantheon off the ground was figuring out like we can do containerization in such a way where individual customers can choose between different plan levels. And if you're on a performance large or performance extra large, like the main thing that's changing is you're getting more PHP containers here. Also, as you move up plan levels, you may get access to Apache Solr and Redis as an object cache. Once you move past the basic level into a performance level, but the key thing Pantheon figured out is like containerization, well ahead of the Kubernetes container revolution that swept over all of the internet in the latter half of the 2010s. Figuring this out in the first half of the 2010s is what got Pantheon off the ground. So if you're on a contract plan with Pantheon, our on-call engineers can add more containers when you need it. And for some of our customers, they just have a certain seasonality to their business, and they have the option to run at a performance large during the busy time and switch it to a performance small and save some money and during the not busy season. That's without rebooting their VPS and taking their site offline.
Yeah. And if anything does happen, like most container orchestrations layers at this point will have like, a YAML file that has a certain like desired state kind of memorialized in it. And if the container ever falls out of that state, it'll like reinitialize that container automatically. So there's no manual intervention required, even if something does happen to it.
Yeah.
So like all parts of the experience get better with a containerized platform as opposed to like a traditional VPS. It's better for everybody.
Yeah. All right, we're starting to run low on time. I think we'll make this the final connection, Ryan, between a professional pressure and a best practice. Oh, I've got to get you on the board here.
All right, there I am.
There you are.
I wish I had the overalls on today. Oh man. Okay, I'm going to go from customer expectations over to environments per Git branch.
Ooh. All right. Tell me more about that connection between customer expectations getting higher. I've got to get green here for your green overalls. Customer expectations over to environments per Git branch. Why is that an important connection?
If you're dealing with multiple stakeholders who are wanting different things and you want to have them see it before you take it live, or even if you've got a stakeholder who's kind of indecisive and wants to see an A version, A version, B version, maybe a C version, the ability to have so many different environments spun up, the multi-devs and Pantheon lingo, the ability to just quickly create a whole new instance of your website to demo one little feature is huge to keep the customer expectations well, where they can see it and you can actually address their concerns quickly and individually.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I should get the screen share back up here. So the multi-dev feature, I jumped over to one of my personal sites here, and I have more multi-devs than I realized. But one of the reasons I wanted to jump here is because it shows some of the different usages of this environment per Git branch. So this is one of my own personal sites. At some point, I don't even remember how long ago I made this environment called menu, but I guess at some point I wanted to change the menu, and I could make an environment just for that. I could make an environment to try out Solar. A lot of the environments that we're seeing here are using a very specific naming convention where it's PR-10. That's a pull request. A lot of Pantheon tooling shows how to connect, say, a GitHub pull request workflow to Pantheon multi-dev environments, so that you get environments per pull request. But Ryan, that connection that you drew between customer expectations and these branches is one I feel very deeply, because I think, like a lot of developers, I made my own version of multi-dev when I wasn't using Pantheon. Like, after I first used Pantheon, I was working for a client who really wanted to self-host, so I couldn't use Pantheon. I couldn't use multi-dev. But yeah, I was in that situation where after the site goes live, I'm working on bug fixes and enhancements, and one is to the header, one is to the footer, one is to the sidebar. And I've got a meeting like on Thursday afternoon where I'm going to show my stakeholder, I've made all these changes. Do you approve? Can I move these changes live? And I don't know which one is going to get approved. And if I don't have environments per Git branch, then like I'm just going to put them all in one environment. And then if only one gets approved, I'm going to have to muck through the code and deploy just that. But if I have one multi-dev that's header, one that's sidebar, one that's footer, I can show them separately. I can send the links over separately, get them pre-approved, not even have the meeting. Just say like, here's the header change. Do you approve? If so, I'll merge it and send it on.
Well, Steve, I can run up here on a story of where we were trying to get the menu approved. We were also messing with the main slider on the homepage at the same time. Slider was a work in progress. It was not finished yet. We went in to show them the brand new menu. They wanted to spend the entire time focusing on all the bugs we knew we had on the slider, and we never got a decision on the menu.
Exactly.
Environment.
Yes. See, that is so much better. If you have a multi-dev, you can just like, they don't even need to know that the slider is in progress and it's not. But yes, if you show them a thing with the header with the menu fixed and the slider broken, all the attention is going to go to the broken slider. All right. Well, that feels like an excellent place to wrap it up. I'll take our screen share off here. Multi-dev, I feel like is maybe Pantheon's killer feature at this point. Like it's such a game changer for me. Ryan, Aaron, any closing thoughts you want to share before we say goodbye?
Mostly that there's a lot of tools like multi-dev that I really, really wish I would have had when I was first starting out as a WordPress dev. That would have made my life a lot easier.
I throw out that just piece of advice if you're trying to get into the more advanced tooling, the composer stuff, the command line tools, and you're not there yet. It can feel overwhelming because you feel like you have to do all of it at once. To me, it's like you're really driving home here, Steve. You find the pressure, you find the fix for that pressure. You do it a little bit at a time. And if you're not doing it all, that's okay. Use the ones that seem best for you in your workflow.
Yeah, no way can any person, any development team, go from not using any of these 15 things or a dozen things ish we had on the list, using all of them. Like you're not gonna change everything in a day, in a sprint, in a month, in a year. Yeah, respond to what's going to be most valuable. Well, thanks so much, Aaron. Thanks so much, Ryan. Thanks so much, you, our audience, for watching here. I'll see you online. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.